Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voice, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining me all the way on the other side of the world, well, almost, is Dr. Justin Kennedy. And Dr. Kennedy was introduced to me by Elizabeth. She goes by Ellie Gould. Her book is called Feeling Forward. And Justin is going to be speaking about his book, Reboot the Brain. But he's also going to be speaking about a few other things as well, and what he's doing with a new collective of a group, this NPN that you see in the lower right-hand corner of the screen there. But Justin, good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
I'm happy to see you, Greg. It's an honor to be on your show. I'm looking forward to our time together.
Well, good. And I'm looking forward to having you. And I'm so pleased that Ellie kind of made the link for us. And I'm going to let the listeners know a little bit about you. You are in Switzerland. Where in Switzerland are you?
Outside Zug, in a very small little town in the Alps on the Bavarian border.
Okay.
So high in the mountains with Heidi. So
okay. High with Heidi. There you
exactly.
go.
There
well,
you go.
Justin is a TEDx speaker. He's a behavioral neuroscience professor at a university, academic and executive coach, organizational neuroscience expert. He's got a certified from Harvard University in neuroscience, Ph.D., researcher and author. His book called Brain Reboot that we're going to talk about, plus other things. He says, and I quote, that he works as a neuroplastician and a coach on a faculty and academic institutes. He has been a TEDx speaker, and he's a PhD supervisor, professor and scholar in behavioral science, and co-founder of ION, Institute of Organizational Neuroscience. He focuses on the field of applied neuroplasticity and coaching towards standardizing. I'm going to underline that word, say it 3 times, because he and I had a pre-interview, and I think a big focus here is of the people we're speaking to that are in this field. That NPN is where you'll want to go to look about membership, because the reality is his group is trying to standardize the practices because it's all over the place right now. There's, as we call them, lone rangers out there running around in neuroplasticity. You can find him at jj@professorkennedy.com. You can find him at www.professor.kennedy, KENNEDDY.com. And for the website, for the, I'm going to say newly formed Certified Association of Neuroplasticians, it's www.npnhub.com, and that's www.npn.com. Well, you had a roundabout way yourself of getting here, Justin, and maybe not the best way to get here. But you start off your book, and you told me in the pre-interview you really wanted to discuss more of the first part of the book, like the first chapter of the book is the best because it's your story. And you start off by saying, I'm recovering from a coma, and you needed to get control over these self-belief triggers that limited your behavioral change for a full recovery. I think for the listeners, it would be really profound for them to hear your story about how you got in the coma, what happened when people started coming in to try and help you, right? And then obviously your observation about the way your brain was working. So let's start there.
So first off, I got into a coma by mistake. It wasn't on purpose, okay? So if anybody's wondering, it was an exercise in neuroplasticity, but not in developmental, but rather deconstructive with my brain damage. It happened on a bike, a motorbike, a Vespa scooter, in fact. And I was knocked over by some drunk driver. And the recovery process, as I mentioned, Greg, it actually continues. I'll tell you about that in a second. it was very difficult to get back on my feet. Literally, I had to learn how to walk again, how to talk again. I still sometimes miss a couple of words, so forgive me if I make a faux pas now and again with a couple of errors. But the most difficult part was really getting my emotions back on track. It was a seesaw between anxiety and depression, aggression and emotion of lack of control. It was a tricky time,
Yeah.
and the consequence was that I fell out of my training to be a psychologist because I got so interested in why wasn't this organ, this piece of flesh in my skull not doing what I wanted to do? Why wasn't it doing what it used to do? Why was I now having to false start on so many things? So it was a very difficult time. And unfortunately, recently, about a couple of years ago, actually about almost 2 years exactly, was that I started having seizures, Greg. And because my brain's starting to decay with age, I've now started out of nowhere, just randomly. I mean, I've had like only half a dozen, so it's not like I'm seizing up all the time and I'm having epilepsy. I'm considered an epileptic now because you just have a couple. But I know your neuroplasticity journey is never over. You've got to keep yourself brain fit, otherwise you can end up in trouble. So my work is my personal journey, most definitely, Greg. I've really had to spend a lot of time getting my own ducks in a row or my own neurons in a row, if you prefer.
Well, it's interesting. You had a Dr. Thompson. I remember you talking about her, and
Yes.
you literally they would send people into your room, and you started to notice things about yourself and the way you could actually propel your healing that they weren't doing. It wasn't part of their regiment, right? It was kind of like, okay, now, so Justin wants to choose how he's going to do this. And it had to do with your emotions. And
Mm.
how you were, like you were just saying, you were dealing with anger and frustration. The brain wasn't working correctly. I can only imagine how frustrating that is because people look at people with mental disease and they can't tell them from anybody else until the
Mm.
behaviors that they institute. And I speak from experience with a brother who was bipolar and manic,
Right.
and you know you could never tell, and he didn't want to take his medications, what behavior he was going to have, right? So tell us
Mm.
how you took things into kind of your own hands as a
Mm.
result of that and why it started working much more quickly for you.
I mean, unfortunately, it wasn't aha, epiphany, I've found the Holy Grail. There's just a lot of tripping up and a lot of trial and error. But the brain is a social organ, Greg, and it was really the people around me that lovingly supported me and kept me on to go to occupational therapy and psychotherapy, and there was a whole battery of therapies I was involved in.
Right.
A big deal. Coach who was saying, okay, you're at this point now where your pathology is now under control, and now you like have some control over making some decisions. So you're going to go eat a pizza and hang out, or you're going to go, you're going to go for a walk, or you're going to go and watch TV, or you're going to go and write some poetry because I used to love writing poetry. So all those little challenges that like get you going again. So it was one grain at a time to build the pyramids.
Well, you said you created a mantra. I'm going to
Mm.
train my brain to change my mind. And you started focusing on your physical body. What happened when you made the commitment to focusing on healing the physical body instead of the brain? Because obviously there's a correlation. If the brain's not working, the body doesn't want to actually do many of
Mhm.
the things that you said. You had to learn how to walk. You had to learn how to pick up utensils again. You had to go through all of the normal rehabilitation of that anybody would go through with a brain injury.
The, the truth, Greg, is that you can't do anything to the brain. You have to work through the body. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the brain doesn't feel anything. It doesn't care about anything. It's basically going to process what you give it. So my one knee was smashed in the accident. So I had to like get into occupational therapy to get the muscles working again. So it became my like thing. And the neuroplasticity about building back those pathways so I could walk again, started a conversation with my brain that there is space for me to reboot neural pathways and get back on track. And that was a very important part. Now I still remember the joy. I mean, I've been able to walk. You know what those guardrails that you get in hospitals? You
Right.
like that. Like I remember them to let go of that thing and able to actually not fall over. So that was a while ago. I'm surprised I can actually remember that because my memory is not great, obviously because of the brain damage. But it's funny that I remember that now. That's so interesting.
Well, you have these insights, and I know that movement of the body. So Dr. Thompson taught you about neuroplasticity, and you became excited about making improvements. You mentioned
Mm,
that part of the journey, and I found this really enlightening, was really laid in yoga. What happened when you did the yoga and meditated, and how did your body and mind change as a result of that? Because it's such a huge practice today worldwide, especially meditation and yoga meditation for stress.
right,
We
right.
know what happens to the brain under stress. I remember, you know, I didn't realize I was creating this stress because it's subconscious many times, but
Right.
I ended up at Scripps, and I'll tell my own little story here. And I was having anxiety attacks like crazy. I'd get in an elevator and I'd have one. I'd go to a restaurant,
Oh,
I'd have one. I'd have them. They were debilitating. And so they put electrodes on my head and they showed me in front of a monitor, here's what your brain is doing. And I came to this epiphany around meditation. And that's when I started meditating the most in my life,
brilliant.
was if I could calm down what was happening, I could eliminate the anxiety attacks that I was having. And I did. I literally, I got rid of them within like a month.
Well done. Well
Yeah.
done. It's about getting that locus of control back.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. And when you feel that what you're doing is giving you some feedback, you get like that reward. You get that dopamine pathway kick in. You get to say, okay, I'll do this again. This is something that is rewarding. Because if you don't get that reward, it's hard to maintain anything. My yoga practice has gone in and out, up and down. And the yoga practice is something very foreign because this is like now 20 years ago more, Greg. So yoga and meditation was still very, very new.
Right.
It was still very new age, if you like. It wasn't so socially easy to get into that environment. So, but it felt so good. So it feels good to do it. Eh?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it evidently worked for you, and
Right.
you tell in the book, Reboot the Brain. You state that the key points in the story were about motivation and remotivation.
Mm,
Um, you mentioned that the points of motivation all had a single emotional basis, and I'll underline emotional basis, a single emotional basis, and there was a feeling of fear. What activities helped you during your part of your recovery?
It's simply, as I mentioned, finding a locus of control that gives you some kind of reward.
Give
So,
an example for the listeners of a locus of control.
so turning on the oven and having a massive pizza is an easy example. You control the oven and you eat the pizza and you feel good. However, pizzas tend to put on weight and you feel sluggish, and the side effects of eating pizza, it doesn't really work so well. So finding healthy things that have a similar structure was what works for me. So, an easy example was the yoga. It doesn't take long to feel the immediate benefits. You then get to bathe in the calming serotonin at the end and just zen out and feel so good. So, finding activities that give you a reward for playing and then give you an outcome that is enjoyable. So it's not more complicated than that. It could be meditation, it could be going for a run, it could be, it could be spending time with a friend, going walk for a dog. I don't know. You can, the list could go on. It's a personal thing. But for
Well,
me,
I think when we first talked, we talked about one of the biggest areas in everybody's life. Maybe not everybody, but 80% of the population at some point is trying to control their weight, change their weight, right? And you just said about a pizza, yeah, it's, you finish the pizza, but it's maybe not as healthy of a choice. But
mm,
let's talk about the choices, because the chemical releases from the brain. I remember in the book you talked about two fists put together,
right,
and with the thumbs crossed, right? And you've got the left and the right side of the brain and the neocortex and so on. Without getting too detailed, when I'm getting a release of, let's say, I know I just interviewed 22 extreme athletes, and the
right,
oxytoxins that get released by guys that are doing big waves or riding big skiing down mountains
wow.
fast, you know, or the runner's high, because people are in runner's high. Well, how do you correlate that? Because everybody out there listening might say at one point, well, I want to lose 15, I want to lose 20 pounds. But the behavior and the brain has to go rewire because they're
Mm.
used to doing something some way and they're rewiring. What advice would you give people about getting on the right path?
For losing weight.
Yeah, in particular.
So there's good news and bad news. What do you want first? And don't say the bad news because everybody does. What do you want? Don't say the good news because I said you must. Let me just get going.
Go ahead. You just tell me. I'll let you tell me
Um,
both of them at the same time.
as you get older, like into your late 40s and your 50s, your body starts slowing down. So, you're not going to be able to eat the same things you would when you were younger, when your body was growing, you could get away with pretty much anything. So, as you get older, nutrition has consequences. Okay. So, it's basically deciding how you want to show up. And there's a very interesting and impressive Nobel Prize winning researcher by the name of Daniel Kahneman, and he speaks about systems 1 and 2 in the brain. And it's a very simple model, and it explains that the immediate or the pizza or whatever shiny object is in front of you, that system is not rational. It's emotional. It is immediate. It is not contemplating the consequences. Okay. And the other system is where you have chance to deliberate, be mindful of your decisions, and giving you opportunity to look at the consequences. And the brain is designed to be an immediate response system because when you're living in the savannah or a cave or wherever we were millions ago, we needed to have that skill because there was scarcity, and the only scarcity we have left is self-control, right? The only way to change a habit is to find a better one, okay? So if you want to change a habit, finding a new one is great. And the best way to sustain that new habit is in a community. That's why Weight Watchers is so brilliant, because there's a group of people around you cheering you on to stay in the program. So the logic is simple. Do something that gives you a reward, do something that's going to be sticky to do again, and build a community around you that's going to encourage you. Trying to diet on your own is a killer. Trying to own is not what the brain is designed to do, Greg. We, as I said earlier, we are social beings. And that is why the whole neuroplastician community is born, because people are lonely out there and they don't know where they can go to get stable, standardized, quality information. They don't really know where to find their peers. So the idea is to build a community. That's the big message.
So I think what happens, and whether it's tiny habits, immunity to change, I've had all kinds of people on this show speaking about how to change habits and behaviors. I think, as you said, the brain, I want to repeat, because that was the key point. The brain is basically set up to react kind of for, right? It goes. And to take the time to make the choice isn't something that's normal. It has to be reprogrammed to do that. The other thing is, when you eat that pizza, you're going to release certain chemical reactions by the intake of basically the flour and the rest of the stuff that you've taken in. So deprivation, you there?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Oh, and I'm saying deprivation of something that's a common food is something, as you said, is got to be done by tiny steps and changing behavior.
And the important point is that it needs to be tiny habits, and I'm all over that book. I think it's brilliant. That stuff is superb. Tiny habits are easier than massive ones. It's obvious that is true, and that needs to be within a context. So that needs to be done in an environment that's safe and motivating. And the brain needs those two things. It needs to be easy and it needs to be communal.
There.
Yeah. So those are
Easy and communal. And I think that's really important, Justin, is how do so one of the things people say, if you want to lose weight, go take everything out of the refrigerator that you don't want and buy all new things, because now you're changing the habit in your kitchen or your refrigerator, and it's not sitting in there, right? So because you will actually reach for maybe the easiest thing, which always isn't the best thing. But my point is if your house is stockpiled, and this is a common thing, it's not anything doesn't know, with all the bad stuff, go get rid of it and just replace it with the good stuff. And then your choice is being made for you, right? In other words, it's being made forward. There's another area that everybody's dealing with today, and it's a really big one, and it's stress. And the world over, there's applications to reduce stress. There's Calm. There's a new one coming out called Enlighten. There's many of them. And you speak with our listeners about the brain triggers by stress, and how we don't have to be defined by the distress and suffering from the stressors in our life, right? So we've all got many different stresses, whether it's financial or it's marriage issues or relationships, or, the stressors go on and on and on, but they seem to, even since COVID, during COVID, impacted the world greater. And now there's more of an emphasis on it. I actually noticed, if there's one thing that's happened here, Justin, is that there's been this huge focus since COVID in the work environment about stress. Speak with us about it and how the brain functions. under stress?
Stress is seasonal, not only in terms of climate, which is a conversation we can have as well, if you like, but it's popular and then it's not popular, and it's always an issue. And there's a great quote, wherever you go, there you are. And, it's the same with stress. You can go on holiday or not, it's not going to make the stressors go away. In the long term, sure, you can have a break. But the point around stress is that it's something you can control. And the sad thing is that, like, when you're in the trenches of chronic stress, you don't feel that you can cope. So stress on its own is good. I mean, cortisol gets you out of bed in the morning, so that's probably a good thing. So stress on its own isn't bad. This stress is good. Eustress is useful. So blaming the stress is not really a good idea. Blaming the stress response is a good idea. And it could be COVID, it could be some other crisis. Stuff happens, hey? And it's what we do with it that counts. And knowing about the brain is great. Doing something about it is better. And having a trusted ally to help you understand what's going on in the mechanisms of your brain, helping someone show, look, these are the neurotransmitters that are going to make you feel a reward response. What does it feel like when you eat that pizza? What is that feeling? Okay, now we got the pizza feeling. How can we copy and paste that into doing some yoga, or going to speak to a friend, or whatever it might be? So it's about cross-pollinating or copy and pasting that feeling so that the person gets the same neurobiological triggers, but with a different source. And as I keep on bleating on, Greg, it's all about the social experience. So if you can have somebody to support you that knows how to help you unpack that experience so that you know what's going on neurophysiologically, so that you know the difference between a feeling and an emotion, so that you know the difference between a sensation and a neuroception. So these are all the things that you can unpack and wrestle with so that the change becomes motivating. I think that's the most important thing. If it's not motivating, it's not going to stick. So that's
well, you are saying something that it's one thing, like it's read a book, study, do things, actions and behaviors which are helping our memory, play a musical instrument, all these kind of things, they help memory. What you're talking about now is the change of a habit. It actually takes thought. The thought has to emanate first before I can do it, because we're kind of on automatic pilot most of the time. We just kind of go through life and we don't, we as Steph is saying at the university where I got my master's degree in spiritual psychology is you don't have to believe everything you think, right? It was a little quote, it was a bumper sticker made of it. And so, when you look at our beliefs, we frequently take on these beliefs as a result of something being propped up, someone else saying this is what you should believe, this is the change you should make, without us really thinking through it. Like why? What's there? Are you going to take the time to do that? And you state that we can grow our brain stronger and we can improve our memory and our thinking abilities. How can the listeners trigger their brains to perform better and sustain these optimal, healthy brain performance?
Okay, many roads lead to Rome, Greg. So, but that's my Italian joke for another day.
Okay.
The first thing is find a buddy. My son did so well in his recent exams, and he said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you gave me this study buddy." So there's this little balloon that is completely nothing. It's a balloon, but he had an association with a study buddy. So having a study buddy balloon is better than nothing, but
Yeah.
having a person who you can have dialogue, being part of a community, being part of a book club makes you much more likely to read than if you just buy a book. Having a tennis racket is great for exercise, but being part of a tennis club is even better. Tiny habits, mindfulness, space to think it through, having the space and energy to do it is, as I said, many roads, but those are the
I
fundamentals.
like the fact that you're saying community helps to support, and I think supporting community, and there are certain elements that need to be part of that for it to work. And if I was to say, some place where you meet regularly, where there's like-minded people, where
Right.
people are stimulating your thought process. That's why in the olden days, they used to call them mastermind groups, right?
Exactly.
I
I
say
love
that,
that. I love it.
and that concept unfortunately kind of died off. We're seeing a little bit of a resurgence, but people are saying, well, I'm too busy to be in a mastermind group, or,
Mhm.
or I'm too smart for those people, or whatever. And I
Mhm.
think what I would encourage people to rethink is it isn't just who it is, it's what you can contribute to that group as well.
I
And
mean,
if,
I've got to interrupt you for a second, if I may, Greg. Everybody's busy. However, everybody's lonely as well.
right,
And the NPN Hub has become teeming with lonely people who all of a sudden have time because they find value. So people are lonely and they're frenetic, hamster on the wheel, chasing the dragon. If you give them space that's motivating for them to connect with other people, all of a sudden the time emerges organically. So the idea of giving it people a space to think and feel and grow together is great. There's space for people to be certified as neuroplasticians based on their previous qualifications. So the neuroplastician is something that is based on your previous qualifications in neuroscience. There's also training institutes that are associated that we can refer you out to. And a lot of those practitioners also, Greg, are doing their PhDs in applied practice. So someone like you who's done your master's, we would speak to them and say, maybe you're interested in doing your PhD based on your current work. So not trying to get you into a PhD program.
you there?
Many different kinds of activities going on in this environment to help people grow and flourish in a like-minded community. And that's,
I I think that you mentioned that, if we're stressed or overwhelmed, that the prefrontal cortex shuts down and that the emotional brain takes over, right? What are some of the ways to calm down the limbic system so that the cortex starts to function again? Because now you're actually talking about what actually happens to us. You're actually putting a picture in someone's mind, and you use the hands and the thumbs over, and
right,
how you did a really good job of it. And I think if people said, oh, I see it, this is what's happening, and this is how I can calm this limbic system down.
yeah. Well, the the generous offer that I'd like to make to your readers for to really unpack that is I'm happy to give the first 100 people a copy of my book, Greg. So I'm happy to share that link with you in your community so that people can have a look at that information in a bit more detail if that would be something
Oh
that would
yeah,
be
we'll do that.
done.
Will you give us a link and we'll let them download the book for free?
Exactly. I'm happy to do that. And the way it goes, it's all about behavior change. Change your mind is great. Change how you're feeling is better. Change how you move will matter. And it's not much more than that. Greg, if you're not happy, do something different. In fact, I was watching Arnold Schwarzenegger's Netflix series, which is so interesting. That guy is a genius. And he was saying, when things are not working, move forward. Just like do something.
Right.
And he said something very, very, very dangerous. And he said, look, I'm not a psychologist, but when people say that, you can only expect something not a psychologist would say. So he said, I'm not a psychologist, but when I'm feeling a bit down, I don't lie around and go to bed. I get up and do shit. And, there's some logic in that. He does, however, forget that the neurochemistry can be out of balance, and getting out of bed can cause distress and cardiac fatigue. And, there's obviously another side of the story, but there is a lot to say about just moving. And
Yes, I agree with you. I mean,
yeah,
every time that I find myself in a situation where I'm feeling stressed or closed in, you know, I just go on a bike ride. For me,
mm,
the best thing I could do is be outside. And I think for most people, getting back
mm,
in nature is a connection with a really valuable source.
that's such a
And
good
don't
point.
take your damn phone with you, and don't put your headset in. Just go
Mm,
walk in the woods or walk in a park, or go on a bike ride, and do it without some electronic device influencing what you're hearing, seeing, and feeling. Let you be with your brain. Whatever your brain is thinking, let it think. It's got all kinds of thoughts. Um,
mm,
I always tell people, when I was doing century rides, the best thing for me, they'd say, well, what do you think about all that time? You're on the bicycle for 6, 8, 9 hours, right? And they say, what do you think about? And I would really actually think about it, Justin. And I think this is an important point. I would say, well, I actually look down at the road, and what I think about is not hitting a hole or falling or doing something dumb or being defensive, right? That that basically is what I'm thinking about. They're like thinking, well, you must be thinking about all kinds of things, but not
right.
really. As you said, the brain kind of, in one sense, is very simple that way. And I love this story that you tell about this reluctant CEO. His name was Adam. This guy had 4 heart attacks. He changed his behavior, but he wasn't willing to stick with your coaching program to change his habits. Um, what does it take for somebody like Adam to rewire their brains? Because he was obviously a type A personality.
Right.
And he was somebody you were coaching, right?
No, with coaching, it's a funny thing. Why are you in a coaching program? Have you been put there by somebody else? Have you been suggested because you're so type A? Everyone, nobody wants to work with you. What is the entry point? So that makes a big difference. If it is a negative entry point, it's much more difficult to be sticky, as it was in this case. So, if you get a bit of benefit and you think, oh, that's good enough, then you're moving on. So it's about finding those reward mechanisms that keep you on track. And it's everything from coaching to eating to maintaining relationships to being a professional to finishing a PhD, whatever it is that you value. It's just about doing the hard yards. It's not there's no easy way out of this life.
Well, I like what you said about Arnold Schwarzenegger. He said, when you get to that point, just do something. And there's a lot to be said for what you said.
Mm,
Um, People may say, well, that's just too simplistic. Well, do something. And here's what I would say: do something different. Not just do something that you wouldn't normally do, or that you've been meaning to do, but you've been postponing. You constantly have said, oh, well, for me, it's a thing called the total gym. So I started getting on the total gym because I have one. For a long time, it sat in the closet. And I feel
Mm.
so much better about myself because it's not just cycling. Now I'm working my upper body and I'm doing other things.
Good.
So the point was, I say when you do something different, then form the habit around doing something different that's enjoyable. So if you want to go play volleyball, then go play volleyball, but go do something. I love what you said about Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I
Now,
mean, doing something is also as simple as meditating. You know,
yeah,
nobody ever stopped doing something and then felt like they had wasted time. And it's just refreshing. It's just a bit of novelty to the brain that you're now doing another activity. Sometimes, and that is just enough. But it's not always just enough. No, there is mental disease. These things do exist. And it doesn't mean that everybody can Arnie their way out of a problem. However, it doesn't mean that you can't give it a go. So, depression is a bitch. You can't really just snap out of it. But the research shows that by exercising, you're getting those endorphins going, you feel a bit better. But it doesn't mean it's going to fix the root cause of the problem. And having someone who's skilled to help you unbundle that stuff is obviously going to be helpful. It's giving you that dialogue, that partnership, that space to think aloud, because our brains like to think aloud. When we get into internal dialogue, it gets very complicated in there. The neural networks get confused by who's speaking and who's listening.
well, I remember a book that Dr. James Gordon wrote. I can't remember the title right now. He's been on the show a few times, but he would say psychologists would spend their life and psychotherapists, um, but psychologists in particular, prescribing drugs for depression. And he would say, look, 90% of the people that are on those drugs don't need those drugs.
Exactly.
And what they need is they need movement in their life. He said,
Mm.
go do Tai Chi, go do yoga, go for a walk in the park, go do a run, get on your bicycle, whatever it might be. He said, movement is a cure for many of these things. And instead of taking Prozac because you're depressed, right? And I loved what he said, because he's really kind of coming out and saying, yeah, there are cases where people do need medications. And he wasn't slamming the pharmaceutical industry,
Mm.
but he was saying, like, seriously, 80% of the time, I can treat patients without medication,
Right.
so that you don't become dependent on it. Now, you of all people have studied brainwaves, what triggers brainwaves to become imbalanced, and how we can trigger our brainwaves back to finding balance. Um, Also, can you mention to our listeners these 7 brainwaves? Theta, delta. You really studied all of these brainwaves. But if you want to summarize it quickly and just say, hey, this is how these brainwaves come out of balance. I thought that part of the book was interesting.
Very good. The simple truth is that knowing about the brainwaves isn't going to help you at all. It's useful if you've got some interest to do a PhD, or if you're interested in learning about it, but rather go use some neurofeedback technology to get a felt sense of what's happening in different brain states and what happens in different hertz. The simple answer is that you want to slow down the brain, because the more hertz you get, the more stressed and tense it becomes. So the goal is to simply, as we said, find that way of controlling the stress rather than getting lost in that distress. So we want to get into that sweet spot of that alpha brainwave, where we're in that flow state, where we're in that space where we're learning and we're dancing with the problem rather than drilling through trying to get it resolved. So I'm speaking about this flow state. You mentioned immersion and Paul Zach's work, and his new technology is so cool. I'm going to, you can interview him, or if you have already, but the idea about the work about getting you engaged in immersion of the experience is it's a great, sorry, it's in my eye. It's a great way for
Are
you.
you okay?
No, it's just it's an eyelash.
Oh, do you need to?
It's a great way for you to find happiness is when you in that moment, when you're lost in the moment, like when you're dancing or swimming or playing the fool, whatever else you might be doing.
Well, I reflect back on people that have been on the show that have spoken about the flow state. And one of them is Stephen Kotler, the Flow Genome Project.
Oh
And
wow.
Stephen's been on the show 6 times, maybe seven, I don't know, but
Mm,
he's just a prolific writer, but also a prolific researcher about flow, what actually creates flow.
mm.
And in one of the interviews, I remember, he says, focus is for free. That's what he says. Focus is for free. Um, but you then have to actually, and for my listeners, they've heard this before, but I don't think you can hear it enough because he kind of did research on, well, uh, if I'm curious, and then I create a purpose from my curiosity, right? And then from that purpose, I create an aim or a goal. And then I go from there and I set the proximal goals. So when you look at people that are curious and in the flow, those are the people literally that he claims get something done, right? In other words, it happens. They can sustain that flow. And and I think a key to is finding purpose. Purpose is a really big thing, right?
Huge, huge.
Huge, huge. And like you've spent your life kind of studying this and helping people and putting this community together, and it's very important. And that leads me to these happy hormones. You have to be getting happy hormones. Um, and people want to know how to produce this and this oxytocin um, without going to go do ayahuasca or something like that, where I can change the brain chemistry short term anyway, because it's prolific what people can do if they really want to. I can microdose LSD. I
Right,
can do
right.
oxytocin. I mean, I can do ayahuasca. So how do I produce these natural happy hormones?
As you said, one word, find your purpose. And that is not so easy. It's not like it's lying around in the garden under the weeper. It's something you have to kind of spend your life doing.
Right.
And it's not it's not the actual finding of the thing, it's the journey towards finding your purpose. And it becomes your life's work. And if work feels like it has a philosophical purpose, whatever that might be, it gives you a sense of well-being. And it's good to distinguish well-being from happiness, because a lot of people think happiness is joy. And I prefer to think that happiness is a way of sustained well-being. And that depends on purpose, as you so brilliantly suggested, Greg.
Yeah, it there really is, I I used to teach a course in purpose, if you can teach a course in purpose, but I
Oh,
did.
wow.
Um,
What was
and
the purpose of it?
uh, I exist to serve to
I'm kidding.
inspire. My purpose,
I'm making a joke.
my purpose is I
Yes,
exist to
yes.
serve to inspire passion. When you break down the word passion, for me, I mean, not in a biblical sense. For me, it's taking people from a place of not understanding or being confused to a place of clarity and understanding. And people say, well, your podcast show is a great example of something you're doing to help to create clarity around,
Mm,
in this case, neuroplasticity. How does our brain
mm,
work? All these interviews help my listeners, as far as I'm concerned, find a place from where they may be confused, misunderstood, to a place of where they can create clarity. Now, that purpose has been with me for literally 25 years when I defined it,
mm,
and I
mm,
haven't changed it. And I have been very dedicated to it. And I think that's true about any teacher, any professor. Your whole goal is to say, hey, I'm here to actually create clarity where there might not be clarity, or to create investigation where there
Right.
may not be investigation, because you help people actually get curious about finding solutions. And NPN is a place where people can continue to use that curiosity amongst a group of other people to actually come up with standardization, new ideas, ways that you're going to bring this out to the world. And that leads me to my last question. If I'm going to reboot my brain, and it can be done in some pretty simple ways, as you're talking about today, what are some of the behaviors that we could adopt to reboot our brains?
And the most important behavior above everything is the behavior of consistency. So it's not really a
Very
behavior.
good.
I mean, it's not a behavior, but it is a behavioral pattern. I don't know, but you know what I mean
It
about
is.
consistency. So, do what you like, but be consistent about it. So that's the whole point. And as we've been discussing, have purpose behind it. And if the purpose is I want to lose weight, it's not really motivating. It's like demotivating. Oh, I'm overweight. But if it's like I want to, be able to swim with my son, or want to go on a hike up, and then there's a positive uh, outcome that is a stretch target. That's very exciting to the brain. And you wake
Yeah.
up and okay, today is another step in the right direction. That feels good. So
I think
building.
what you're doing is you're talking about kind of feeling forward when usually, whether it's Weight Watchers or it's any other thing, we're talking about losing weight because it's a pretty common one, but there's many. I want to look good in my suit at my daughter's wedding. I want to look
Exactly.
good in my dress when I go to this, the prom. I want to look good because I'm going to go to the class reunion, you know. And that sense is because you can see that, right? You can visualize that.
Exactly.
You can feel it. You also know what it feels like. And I think when you would tie, like Ellie said, the one who introduced us, the emotion to the outcome, right? It's almost like you're living it already, right? And I and
Exactly.
I
That's
think
the feed forward model of her expertise. It makes so much sense, doesn't it?
it does. And I think when you're talking about our brains are, they're not stupid almost, but they're
Mhm.
designed to just keep us continuing going on, right? And I think
Mm.
part of us is designed um, for homeostasis. So we literally start to default. So if we push something in one direction, it's going to go, uh-oh, no, 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 you don't want to go that far with that. You need to come back here because this is where I feel good. I don't want to push. So you can imagine somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger's listed hundreds of thousands of pounds, right? There aren't very many people that are going to want to dedicate themselves to going into a gym and doing that. And you said staying consistent, right? It takes a lot of work. And I'll add a word to your definition: dedication.
Brilliant.
Consistency and dedication is the key to this. So now for all of my listeners, you're going to want to go to these websites. You're going to want to get a free copy because Justin's going to provide us with a free copy of this link to download his book. And for all the people that are in the neuroscience field, okay, we'll have a link to the NPN uh, website where you can go. We'll also have a link to professorkennedy.com website where you can learn more about him.
Yeah.
And it's been an honor and pleasure having you on the show. I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
taking
Thank
the
you.
time to just tell us about what you're up to, give us some ideas and thoughts about how we can reprogram and rewire our brain, and also your story about the coma. I think, how you got here is a result of your own personal history. You know, we look back in time. It's like when you see and you weave the tapestry in your life and you go, wow, how did I get there? What triggered that? Right. And
Yeah.
I think Dr. Thompson triggered it. I think the guy who hit you on the moped triggered it. I think there's a lot of things, but you changed the course of direction of your life because you became passionate about things that you were trying to cope with. Right?
Exactly. It became a personal journey, and I hope that people come join us at npnhub.com. Great. When they join as a member, they get like a free couple of weeks. They can get the book for free when they join. Tell them to come and join us. It's a great conversation. It's a great community. And no, I hope to see you soon. I hope you'll have me back on your podcast. And I really love this time together. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate having you on, Justin. You have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, Greg. Take care of yourself.
Namaste.
Namaste.